Syracuse's defense was not very good last season, but brighter days could be ahead.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What does Syracuse football need in the transfer portal on defense? That's what we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen, on today's show. Hello, everyone. I'm Jackson Holzer. This is Locked On Syracuse, and thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. And, of course, we're always free and available wherever you get your podcasts here on the #1 sports podcasting network. And on today's show, we are going through each position group on the defense and assessing what this defense needs in the transfer portal. We'll talk about a couple of position groups that actually look pretty good on paper heading into the 2026 season. We'll talk about one position group that's losing a couple of starters, but it's not a premium position. And Syracuse also has depth that could potentially make up for the losses. But we must start the podcast going over the #1 need for Syracuse on defense, and arguably the #1 need overall in the transfer portal for this team. All that and more coming up here on today's edition of Locked On Syracuse. And before we get to everything, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. Let's set the stage, ladies and gentlemen, because I led off this podcast by saying that, look, the defense last year wasn't very good, but brighter days could be ahead. Why am I saying this? Well, for starters, we did a whole podcast about this, but the Orange have a new defensive coordinator this upcoming season. They brought Vince Kehres over from Toledo, and Vince Kehres built some pretty great defenses while he was there, and hopefully his expertise can translate well to Syracuse. That's just on the coaching front. So right there, Elijah Robinson out, Vince Kehres in, hopefully right there with coaching. That is an upgrade. They're also bringing back their 3 key players from the defense last year. Again, it wasn't a very good defense, but there were a few bright spots for it. And those guys have all announced their intention to come back. Antoine DesLauriers, inside linebacker, and you have your 2 top corners, Demetres Samuel, a 17-year-old true freshman last year, and Chris Peal, who's got multiple years of eligibility, also coming back. So they have a new DC. They have 3 key building blocks coming back. And so, yeah, the Orange have lost some pieces on defense, whether it's through the portal or through eligibility. But I do believe that brighter days are ahead. That being said, let's get to the needs for Syracuse on defense in the transfer portal. The portal does not officially open until January 2nd, and it runs until January 16th. But as I'm sure most of you are pretty well aware, players are already announcing their intention to enter the transfer portal. And actually, we covered this last week, how the Orange already have a visitor lined up with Marcus Stokes, who could be the backup quarterback for the Orange. So yeah, everyone's talking, even though the portal doesn't officially open until January 2nd. As far as the needs, the #1 need for Syracuse on defense, and there's no question about it, it is the defensive line. So much so that defensive line isn't just the #1 need for Syracuse on defense. It's the #1 need for Syracuse, period, in this transfer portal cycle. Last year, Syracuse in the ACC had the 2nd worst run defense. That's just total, which is not good. But if you dive deeper, it's actually worse. Syracuse gave up the most yards per carry in the ACC last season at 5.3, to be exact. Think about that for a moment. 5.3 yards per carry allowed. That is including the fact that sacks go against rushing yards in college football. Not good, allowing 5.3 yards per carry. As far as getting to the quarterback, Syracuse had the third fewest amount of sacks in the ACC a year ago. So they couldn't stop the run, and they could not get to the quarterback. I know it's not all on the defensive line, but a lot of it is on the defensive line. They're losing a lot of pieces too. Some of the pieces that they're losing, Dennis Jacques, Dion Wilson, George Rooks, David Reese, Kevin Jobity, Elijah Fuentes-Cundiff, and Chris Thomas. They're losing all of them due to eligibility. Those guys a year ago, I did the math, they combined for over 2,000 defensive snaps. All of those guys. But like I said earlier about the production, or really its lack of production, is it really a bad thing that they are losing all of those guys through eligibility? Because the way I see it, Syracuse can significantly improve their personnel along the defensive line. As far as the specifics, Jackson, do they need interior defensive line? Do they need edge? What are your thoughts? Anywhere. Pick. I'm serious. It's very similar to what we talked about the offensive line, which we did a few weeks ago when going over the offense transfer portal needs. Could they use a tackle? Yeah. Could they use a guard? Yes. Could they use a center? Absolutely. With the defensive line, could they use an edge? Yes. Interior? Yes. It's the whole defensive line that they need. It's very difficult to build a good defense without a strong defensive line. Unless you plan on having your DBs cover receivers for 5 seconds or having Ray Lewis as your middle linebacker. I love Antoine DesLauriers, but he ain't no Ray Lewis. Not exactly easy. But the warning is that defensive line is a premium position. Every team could use defensive line, can they? The best teams in college football, it's no secret they have the best defensive lines. Think about the Miami Hurricanes and how they beat up on Tennessee. Mesidor and Ruben Bain. It's a premium position. And because it's a premium position, because it's so valuable, and the fact that there are not a lot of very good ones out there, you need to spend a lot of money in order to have a really strong defensive line. Can Syracuse do it? I hope they can. They probably need about 4 starters on the defensive line in the portal. I'm open to giving young guys a chance. They do have 3 defensive linemen that are rated 4 stars coming in from high school. So that's good. There's a pipeline. There seems to be a foundation, but do we want to count on those guys to be day one, immediate impact at that position group? It's one thing making the adjustment if you're like a corner in high school to a corner in college. Yeah, the speed is different, the physicality is different, all that stuff. It's another thing along the fronts. Oftentimes, along the fronts, in this case, we're talking about defensive line, they need that redshirt year as a true freshman, just so they can build up their bodies to be able to handle Division I power conference football. So I like the pipeline that's coming in. I'm open to giving young guys an opportunity if they've earned it, but they need about 4 starters along the defensive line in the transfer portal. Ladies and gentlemen, are you with me? Are you against me? Do you think that defensive line is the number one need for Syracuse, period? Comment your thoughts right now in the comment section below. Now, coming up, another position group that Syracuse needs, but good news, this is not necessarily a position group that is extremely valuable. Find out what it is next on Locked On Syracuse. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play, and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds, every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift, a receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into the moment. Live spreads and money lines, they adjust almost instantly, and you can bet the next touchdown score, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked in every snap, every drive, every possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. Locked on Syracuse, I'm Jackson Holzer. Once again, we are discussing what Syracuse football needs in the transfer portal on defense. And before we continue with the Orange's needs in the transfer portal on defense, just want to shout out, ladies and gentlemen, all of you have already made it this far in the podcast. I hope that means that you enjoy the Locked On Syracuse podcast. And if you do and you haven't done so already, please feel free to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel grow to reach all Syracuse Orange fans. I would say that the number 2 need for Syracuse on defense in the portal is safety. But unlike what I said about the defensive line and how it's the number 1 need for Syracuse, period, I don't think that safety is the number 2 need for Syracuse, period. In fact, I would take offensive line over that as well. I would take backup quarterbacks. I would debate tight end, whether or not tight end or safety is a bigger need. Probably around the same, if we are being honest. Syracuse is losing a couple of starters from actually the past 2 seasons. Heading into the 2024 season, the Orange brought back Duce Chestnut. Remember, he was with Syracuse's first couple of years, then decided to transfer to LSU for a season. Didn't really work out there. Comes back to Syracuse, moves to safety, plays the next 2 years. He was a starter in 2024 and 2025. And also Devin, who Syracuse also brought in heading into the 2024 season. He was from Buffalo, an all-conference player there, and started for Syracuse in 2024 and 2025. Obviously, Devin Grant, his memorable play in a Syracuse uniform was stripping Xavier Restrepo of Miami at the end of the 2024 season, recovering the fumble, and then taking it back to the house to give Syracuse the lead in the third quarter. So those guys have started for Syracuse the past 2 seasons, and I don't want to downplay those losses. Those were 2 solid players. Were they special, all-conference, absolutely impossible to replace caliber players? Not necessarily. They did have their flaws. But like I said, I think earlier this offseason, if you told me that heading into 2026, Syracuse's starting safeties would be Duce Chestnut and Devin Grant, I would not be upset about that at all. But they're not back. And Syracuse, if they're not careful, they could absolutely do worse in the portal. We were talking about defensive line and how they're losing a ton of players. And, well, it's not like those guys were productive. Well, Devin Grant, Duce Chestnut were pretty productive. Those were solid players that Syracuse is going to need to replace. There's a couple of pieces of good information here, though. Yes, it is a need, but first, the Orange do have some depth at safety. At the time of this recording, which I'll admit is not on Wednesday, I'm actually recording this on Monday. I'm getting a little bit of advance here. Brahim Long and Cornell Perry are supposed to come back, or they have not yet, at the time of this recording, announced their intention of leaving Syracuse. So if they're both coming back, that gives Syracuse some depth at safety. Now, both are veteran players. I'm not so sure if they are full-time starters for the Orange next year, but it gives Syracuse something to build on. Number 2, safety is not a premium position. What are the premium positions in football? Quarterback is the obvious one. We all know quarterback is a premium position. Offensive line, defensive line are premium positions. Wide receiver and corner. The premium positions in football. Safety is not. They are less valued, which means they don't cost the same amount of money relative to their ability as other position groups. So while Syracuse does need safety, they don't necessarily need to break the bank in order to get some safeties in the transfer portal. It's not like defensive line where everyone is chasing great defensive linemen. Those guys are incredibly difficult to get. Safety? Sure. The elite ones that become available, like Caleb Downs a couple of years ago, yeah, he's going to go for a lot of money. He's going to be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. You got me. Is Syracuse really going to go out there in the transfer portal when they have so many other needs to fill and say, let's break the bank and get a top safety? I hope not. They have so many other needs before they need to get to the safety position. And I do think that they can find good value at safety this offseason. I mean, Duce, Chestnut, and Devin are great examples. Those weren't the biggest, most amazing splashes in the world, but they became starters for Syracuse at safety for 2 years, and both were at least solid. So, to wrap this up, does Syracuse need safety in the portal because they are losing Duce Chestnut and Devin Grant? The answer is yeah. But is it the biggest priority for Syracuse to go out and get 2 safeties and spend top dollar on getting safeties? That answer is no. I do think they could find good value at the safety position, improve that position group, and be fine with it going into next year. They need to focus on other position groups like offensive line and defensive line and backup quarterback before they can even think about improving safety. But it is a need. Comment your thoughts right now in the comments section below. Do you think that safety is a big need for Syracuse? Now, coming up, we'll talk about a couple of more position groups for Syracuse next on the Locked On Syracuse podcast. Locked On Syracuse, I'm Jackson Holzer. There are still a couple of more position groups that we need to talk about for Syracuse football's defense as far as transfer portal needs. Earlier, we talked about how the Orange definitely need defensive line all along the unit. They also need safety. Now is where we get to some position groups where we have to start kind of diving a little bit deeper to see if they truly need this position or not. Linebacker. Could Syracuse use linebacker in the transfer portal? Well, you got Antoine DesLauriers coming back. Gary Bryant has eligibility. Jamie Tremble has a ton of upside. So you have a solid foundation already there. Could you use another linebacker? Whether it's someone on the edge or someone on the interior? Sure. I do think so. I do think you can improve on Gary Bryant. I do think that you can give yourself insurance on Jamie Tremble because while he has a ton of upside, is he going to be a great outside linebacker for this team? Who knows? But is it a big pressing need? Are there obvious holes to fill at linebacker? That I would say is no. Again, this offseason is all about priorities. You need defensive line. You need offensive line. Safety is a need. Tight end is a need. Backup quarterback is a big need, and we know that as well. Once you start addressing the biggest positions of need, then you can get to linebacker and say, well, how can Syracuse improve it? More good news about linebacker. It's not a premium position unless it's on the edge. Edge, absolutely premium, pass rushers. But interior linebacker, not really a premium position. And so Syracuse does feel the need to improve there. They can certainly find good value and not have to spend a lot of money to improve that position group. Could they use another linebacker? Yes. Pick a group. You want interior, you want edge, fine. But do they absolutely need it? The answer is no. Finally, that takes us to the cornerback room. No team could have enough good corners. It is a premium position. Every team is searching for corners. You know, the wide receivers are so good, and we all know that. So you need people who can cover them. That being said, thankfully for Syracuse, at the time of this recording, corner is not a big area of concern, in my opinion. Demetres Samuel, 17-year-old true freshman from last year. Almost an All-American for a true freshman. Not quite. Almost. 17 years old. Started every game last year. Is coming back. Chris Peal, brought in from Georgia this past offseason. He's coming back with multiple years of eligibility. So both are young and both have experience as starting corners for Syracuse. They were two of the brighter spots for Syracuse's defense last year. And I don't put really a lot of all the blame on them whenever they did get beat because, well, they didn't generate a pass rush. And so if you're asking them to cover for an extended period of time, it's not exactly easy to do that. They're flawed a little bit. I mean, Demetres Samuel, we talked about at times here on the podcast over the year, he can get a little bit handsy, and hopefully that's cleaned up in the offseason and he comes back better. But I guess that's the point, is that both still have room to grow, and both were actually pretty solid last season. Well, they're both back. So if the opportunity presents itself where a good corner says they want to play for Syracuse, I mean, you don't say no. It's a premium position group. But again, it's about priorities. We know that this team needs an influx of talent. The question is really, where should they be putting that talent? What do they have on the roster versus what do they need? Should they break the bank on a corner? No. Not at the expense of getting defensive line. Not at the expense of getting offensive line or anywhere else. I view corner and wide receiver for Syracuse in almost the same light. They are both premium positions in which Syracuse doesn't really have to spend a lot of money this offseason because they already have their guys in place. Maybe you feel differently. Comment your thoughts right now in the comments section below if you think that Syracuse needs to address corner this offseason. And overall, what are the biggest needs for Syracuse football's defense in the transfer portal? Feel free to comment your thoughts right now in the comment section below. Now, as far as what's coming up on the Locked On Syracuse podcast here in the near future, tomorrow we will have a full episode talking about Syracuse basketball and what they need to do in ACC play to give themselves a shot at making the NCAA tournament. I am recording this before the game on Monday. I'm going to assume that they beat Stonehill. We'll see what the margin of victory of that game was. But either way, I can tell you right now that they're going to need to be doing a lot in ACC play to make the NCAA tournament. And we hope they do make the NCAA tournament. So that's the podcast coming out tomorrow here on Locked On Syracuse. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. If you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe. Tell all your friends about Locked On Syracuse, and I will see you all again soon.